Hello everybody, welcome to WhatCulture Gaming. I'm Scott, joined by Josh.
Hello, Scott Tailford.
Josh, a friend, it's a new year, and turns out The Last of Us Remake is actually coming out in 2022.
It turns out, Scott Tailford, it's 2013 and indeed 2014 all over again because The Last of Us is coming out, The Last of Us Part 1. And we actually covered this last year. There was a huge leak about what was going on in Naughty Dog and Sony in regards to The Last of Us. And it was revealed there that, Naughty Dog are currently working on The Last of Us Part 1, a full PS5 remake from the ground up, not just another remaster like they did with the remaster version on PS4. And according to Tom Henderson, an industry insider, who did a load of stuff last year, it might be coming as early as the end of 2022 because apparently, according to his tweets, it's quote-unquote almost finished. Now, this has been picked up by a bunch of other sites, including VGC, Video Games Chronicle, who have reached out to their own sources and corroborated the information. So while this started as a tweet, it's kind of been semi-confirmed by a bunch of other sources. So essentially, there are a few other details here, but we're looking at a 2022 where we're going to get The Last of Us Part 1 on PS5, completely remade. What do you make of that?
Usually the word remake makes me run for the hills, but I part of me every few months wants to replay Last of Us 1 and 2, because I feel like 2, it came out at the weirdest possible time. Obviously there's the content of that game. You know, there are certain plot decisions in that game that were obviously massively controversial, etc., whatever. Last of Us 2 didn't go down as beautifully swell as the original, but the release date of that thing, overall, obviously, it was the start of the pandemic, but it is the sequel to this such a critically acclaimed game. I wonder how it feels going back to the original one story, straight into Last of Us 2, like if you sort of do them side by side, and if they've made Last of Us 1 look anything close to 2, maybe they just work better as a compendium. I mean, I've not played Last of Us 1 in a couple of years, but it is that thing where, for me, it is still one of the greatest games of all time. I hope that it very much holds up, and I kind of wonder what they've done to it. Like, what do you think they've... Do you think they've changed the shooting model and stuff?
As you may have noticed, me kind of itching to jump in there. I actually did play them back to back, and when it came out, I got the review copy, so I played it through for review. And then on launch weekend, I actually went through The Last of Us Part 1, and then immediately went into The Last of Us Part 2 again. And when I was first playing The Last of Us Part 2, like a lot of other people, I was kind of thinking, oh, this is good, but it's the same gameplay as before. They haven't changed much in the massive amount of years. And then I immediately went back to Part 1, and while the basics are still there, Part 2 is so much smoother from a gameplay perspective, and it includes things that I didn't even know were missing from the first. So when I went back, the first game's combat, while still holding up quite well, it felt so much clunkier compared to what they achieved with that second game. So with this being a remake, I do hope they implement the feel of Part 2, the fluidity, you know, the different animations, the different combat options that you have, you know, in the gameplay itself. I think whilst you don't need to remake The Last of Us Part 1 at all, that thing is still awesome, that thing still holds up, it's still an amazing game. I can play devil's advocate and see how they could improve things. I could see how they could, you know, make those cutscenes even more dynamic, even more lifelike. I could see how they make the combat encounters even more fluid, even more visceral and tactile. So I can see how they're going to do it, and I think it will be good, but it just is the case of, do we really need this? And Tom Henderson, you know, mentioned later on in those tweets about how, this was just speculation on his part, how The Last of Us TV show, the HBO show that's coming out this year as well, and it makes, you know, a lot of business sense to drop the remake of Part 1 alongside that TV show and just absolutely hype The Last of Us brand up to high heaven.
Well, they should do something, because Uncharted is not going down very well. Like, I saw that they released the movie, the full plane clip from the movie, and all the comments are just people going like, well, they're clearly getting desperate if they're putting the entire action scene out, which seems to be the biggest premiere bit of that movie. But yeah, in regards to The Last of Us, like you said, originally when it was announced that they were doing a remake, I think we did a news just being like, Sony, what are you doing? Make better use of your teams. Because I think the only reason that this exists, if all the prior leaks were correct, is because Naughty Dog, while they work on their next bigger project, while the likes of Neil Druckmann, Harley Gross, whatever, decide what they're going to do, the rest of the team just needs something to do. So it seemed like it was like, well, why not go remaster The Last of Us? Although, like you said, it does tie in with The Last of Us TV show, and, you know, they can do a whole bunch of different bundle stuff tying in with the second game. Put all that stuff out, maybe have a whole new lease on life with that game, considering how divisive it was last year. But yeah, what do you think of like the way the way they're approaching The Last of Us as a brand? Like, they now have the TV show stuff. They're maybe going to do more with it. Last of Us 3 was talked about at one point by Druckmann. Saying that they did sketch it out, but they went back on it. I guess it's like, do you want Last of Us to be more of a platform, like a Walking Dead style thing?
I mean, I go back and forward on it. You know, I didn't even think The Last of Us would ever get a sequel, which is incredibly naive. But that project just seems so complete and like it didn't necessarily need one. The Last of Us 2 came around. I loved it.
Some would say it still doesn't, Josh Brown. But I don't know.
The Last of Us 2 came around. I loved it. I'm looking forward to the HBO show. I think stop doing that. I can see you at the corner of my eye. I think the HBO show looks really good. I think that's really promising. The creators they've got on board, the cast that they have. And at this point, I'm just kind of like, if this is a franchise, I guess I'm here for it. I guess I'm all in. You know, Tom Henderson also reiterates, again via VGC, that, you know, we've still got The Last of Us 2's multiplayer suite. Obviously, The Last of Us Part 1 shipped with the Factions game mode, which was a criminally underrated multiplayer third-person shooter arena thing. Like, that's still coming as a potentially standalone thing. And he also mentioned The Last of Us 2 Director's Cut, which is going to follow the Ghost of Tsushima Director's Cut and the Death Stranding Director's Cut coming to PlayStation 5. So maybe that version of the game rolls in Factions. Maybe that Factions is also going to link to The Last of Us 1 Remake. That's just speculation on my part. But it seems like if all of this drops in 2022 alongside the TV show, it's going to be a very big year for The Last of Us as a brand. The biggest year yet.
Usually we'll quickly scan over each other's notes before we do these, because one of us will take one news thing, the other one will take something else. I completely missed the idea of The Last of Us 2 Director's Cut. I didn't see that at all. I'm curious what they do with that, if they're going to do more story stuff with that. Do they give us more Joel chapters, do you think?
I honestly don't know. Like the Last of Us 2, again, it's another complete game, but there are so many other avenues they could go down. You know, there's a lot of time between The Last of Us 1 and 2 that while some of it was filled in, you know, they could do a crowd-pleasing Joel and Ellie story, set between them. They could do, you know, something with Abby, for instance. There's a lot of scope for the things they can plug into it. For my money, considering how much they're juggling, you know, they're juggling the remaster, they're juggling the multiplayer, they're juggling this potential director's cut, I think it will just kind of be an upgraded version with Factions plugged in, maybe The Last of Us 1 Remake as well. I don't think we'll see any more story content until a potential Last of Us Part 3. I think that might have been announced by now.
I wonder if they sat on Factions. I mean, obviously they were, there was the whole statement at the time about they were focusing on the story and the single player. They wanted to polish that as much as possible. But I wonder at what point Sony decided they were going to do their Game Pass alternative, Spartacus, because I wonder what different things they can have attached to that. If they launch, whatever it ends up being called, I hope it's not Spartacus. But if they end up launching that thing, maybe a Last of Us multiplayer just, going alongside that just makes perfect sense to get people in, or it's a free-to-play thing that, just works wider anyway. I would hope that they have thought of those things. Because like you said, Factions, the original one, the original Last of Us multiplayer is just so overlooked. It had really cool social media integration where it would bring in the names of your friends and it would put them on NPCs, and it would be all about resource management and going out and doing different death matches, retrieving different things. And it kind of had like a long form storytelling narrative feel to it, even though it was just a series of multiplayer matches. So I hope they can do something with that. I think that if Naughty Dog, it's they aren't really known for multiplayer other than maybe The Last of Us and I guess Uncharted's multiplayer. So I would hope that they sort of sit down and go, we're Naughty Dog, we're pretty good at the story stuff, maybe we'll do something that is a more story infused multiplayer and flesh that side of it out.
I mean, you hope so. I mean, I at least hope so, because that was such a defining part of the original Factions. Like you said, that kind of like meta story, that meta game, it was cool. And to the idea of that being expanded upon for a full release, that really excites me. And the fact that it didn't just ship alongside with The Last of Us 2 and has taken this long, to me indicates that it's going to be a chunky experience, whatever it is. But, just to kind of like finish off, looking at Sony's slate this year, if this slots in, they've got like such a strong lineup. We've got Horizon Forbidden West coming in February. We've got GT7 coming straight after. We've got the likes of Ghostwire Tokyo, which, while not a first-party game, is an exclusive. We've got Forspoken, and we might have The Last of Us to see us out of the year. And that's a pretty, I don't know about you, my friend, that's a pretty tantalizing lineup.
Sifu's right there too, mate. He's kicking his way in.
Exclusive? Is that exclusive?
It's definitely, yeah. It's probably just going to be a timed one, but it's a launch exclusive.
I didn't know that. Get that in there. Sifu looks awesome. Yeah, throw that in there as well.
It does, but yeah, like you said, overall they have a hell of a lineup. It seems like it's an interesting year because so much stuff was pushed back. It's very much going to be the third party's time to shine because so much stuff was pushed back at the end of last year. But overall, there's a lot of stuff to look forward to, as long as you don't mention a certain 3 letters that we did another news video on. So you can go check that one out and find out what I'm talking about. But in regards to Last of Us, let us know what you think. What do you want to see from the director's cut for Last of Us Part 2? What do you think of what they should do to the remake of the original? And what do you want to see get fleshed out in the Last of Us Factions multiplayer? For now, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com.
I've been Josh from WhatCulture.com.
And we'll catch you next time.
Bye-bye.
Talking over Josh.